Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Carolyn Gregoire, the events manager here at Tricycle. We're thrilled that you're here to join us for Understanding the Factors of Awakening, a live workshop with Bodhi College teachers Christina Feldman and Jaya Rudgard. Christina and Jaya have many years of experience between the two of them teaching in the insight meditation tradition, and we're thrilled to have them here to teach us about the awakening factors teachings of the early Buddhist canon. This workshop is a preview for an upcoming 8-week online course, The 7 Factors of Awakening, which will go much deeper into some of the themes that Christina and Jaya will be introducing today. That course starts next Monday, September 13th, and we'll be offering a special discount for attendees today. So we'll put that discount code in the chat box and also in an email that you'll receive after the event. If you'd like to ask any questions, you can submit them into the chat box at the bottom of the screen at any time. So Christina Feldman is a guiding teacher emeritus at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. The author of a number of books, she's been teaching insight meditation retreats internationally since 1976. She's one of the teaching faculty of the CDPP program, dedicated to the study and applications of the early teachings of the Buddha. She also teaches on the Buddhist psychological foundations of mindfulness to those training to teach mindfulness-based applications in England, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Jaya Rudgard began meditating in 1984, and from 1996 to 2005 was ordained as a nun in the Thai forest tradition in England at the Amaravati Buddhist monastery. She trained as an insight meditation teacher at Spirit Rock and Insight Meditation Society. She teaches retreats and courses in the UK and internationally. Jaya has extensive experience teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and mindful self-compassion. And she teaches retreats for mindfulness teachers and teachers in training. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you two.
Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm somewhat sorry I can't see your faces, but I'm assuming you're out there. So Jaya and I are really happy to offer this evening what we think of as being the factors of awakening is something that's close to both of our hearts. So we want to just give you a little bit of an overview. The bojjhanga, we usually translate this as the 7 factors of awakening. I think a little bit more accurately, they're actually the 7 limbs of awakening, the 7 limbs of one body. And the Buddha refers to these limbs of awakening as really being the treasures within, qualities we deeply honor and cherish, qualities that are truly embedded and central in a path of awakening. So we want to just give you a little bit of an overview of what we're covering this evening, or perhaps I'll start with an introduction. You know, for more than a year and a half now, for all of us, you know, the story of our lives has in many ways been written by the conditions that we live in. And the story of our lives has very much been written by, of course, the pandemic, which has overturned the lives of so many, radically changed the lives of so many. It has actually brought so many losses. And of course, the conditions of the pandemic have very much, you know, really governed in many ways, you know, what we do, how we act, who we see, what we don't do. And what we see is that this is the story of the world of conditions. One of the really central teachings of the Buddha is this deep acknowledgement that none of us are invulnerable to the world of conditions, much of which we cannot control. But he also taught that we can find a way of being where we are not hostage to the world of conditions. And this brings us actually to the 7 treasures. If you think about it, you know, reflect upon it, of course, we're always writing a story. We're always writing the story of our lives. And sometimes the story of our lives is written through our thoughts, our views, our desires, our anxieties, our aversions, our opinions, our moods. And the story of our lives can also be written by the lovely, healing, liberating qualities that we can cultivate and bring to fulfillment and bring to unshakability in very real ways. We see it, there are many of these qualities that are really encouraged in the Buddhist teaching, whether it's the Brahma Viharas, the qualities of kindness and compassion, joyfulness, equanimity, whether it's the paramis, the landscape of compassion, or whether it is these 7 treasures that many of you will be familiar with. The qualities of mindfulness, wakefulness, the quality of investigation, the quality of courage and energy, the quality of joyfulness, the quality of tranquility, serenity, the quality of collectedness, and the quality of equanimity. These are the lovely. These are the lovely. And I would really encourage you to reflect on how your life, how our lives together would look like if the story of our lives was actually written by these qualities. I want to share with you a really lovely story I came across recently. Vedran Smailovic was the principal cellist in the Sarajevo Opera Company when the civil strife broke out in Bosnia. His response to the conflict and ensuing chaos was to put on his formal concert attire, walk out of his apartment into the midst of the battle raging around him, and play his cello every afternoon for an hour. He would place a little camp stool in the middle of the bomb craters and play a concert to the abandoned streets while bombs dropped and bullets flew all around him. Day after day, he made his own personal and courageous stand for human dignity, for civilization, for compassion, and for peace. Miraculously, he was never harmed. The newswires picked up the story of this extraordinary man sitting in his white tie and tails on a camp stool in the center of a raging, hellish war zone, playing his cello to the empty air. My own sense is that when we commit ourselves to truly cultivating these 7 treasures in the midst of the conditions we find ourselves living in, we are also kind of making our own personal and courageous stand for human dignity, for awakening, for compassion, and for peace. There are many ways of approaching this path that we travel. We all know that the waking up process is not one that is easy. We encounter so many times when we stumble, or difficult qualities that we encounter that feel so embedded. And one way of approaching this path is almost an approach of highlighting and working on the difficult, almost an endeavor to eliminate the difficult so we can find that sort of romanticized ideal of this profound peace and happiness as almost as a reward for having gotten rid of the difficult. I think as many people, with our kind of instilled work ethic, our ideas of perfection, this approach of working on things, uprooting things, perhaps comes quite easily to us. When I read the early teachings, I read something a little bit different. Yes, there's a deep knowledge of the challenges we face in this path. But what I read is this profound encouragement again and again, moment to moment, to cultivate the lovely, to cultivate the healing, to cultivate the liberating in the classroom of our lives, in the classroom of the difficult. And to have the confidence, to actually have the trust that through that cultivation of the lovely, that this is actually what does the work, if we use that word. This is what has the effect of lessening and beginning to uproot so many of those difficult patterns, tendencies, moods that seem to obstruct happiness and peace. I want to turn over to Jaya now.
Thank you, Christina, and hello, everybody. I'm also sorry that I can't see you, but it's lovely to sense you all out there. And just to acknowledge the things that might have brought us to this session and to be bringing us to either have signed up for a course like this or be considering signing up for a course like this. That many of us, whether we're new to practice or whether we've been practicing for a long time, find it really helpful to have some kind of a structure that we can put around this task of, Christina has used several times this word cultivation, which is the English translation of the word bhavana, or that we also translate as meditation. But the Buddha often spoke about the practice in terms of this activity of bhavana. And it's such a wonderful metaphor because it speaks to the way that our practice is something that is organic. We're working with a lot of natural processes. We're working with the ecosystem of our lives, our personal patterning and inheritance, and also the ecosystem of the times and the cultures that we find ourselves in. It can be really helpful to use some of these maps or lists or kind of frameworks that he offers so liberally in the early teachings, such as this framework of the 7 factors of awakening, the bojjhangas, to actually help us navigate and to have some sense of agency, something we can get our teeth into, some way of at least exploring our practice in a kind of structured way. And these factors are really one of the particular lists that the Buddha really emphasized as being very important or very valuable to understand and develop. We find them particularly in the teaching on the ways of establishing mindfulness, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, that this group of qualities is presented under the 4th way of establishing mindfulness, along with the kind of, these are the awakening factors. They're presented alongside the veiling or obscuring or occluding factors, which we often we hear them called the hindrances, as kind of 2 equally important lists to become really familiar with, or groups of qualities to become really familiar with. And in this task of cultivating, creating a healthy climate for the awakening mind, creating the qualities in which an awakened life can thrive, we equally need to become familiar with what needs to be, or what it serves us to uproot and to root out, and what it serves us to tend to and to cultivate. And in tending to and cultivating these particular beautiful qualities in the mind, we start to decondition and weed out the unhelpful ones. And at the same time as we weed out the unhelpful ones, the beautiful qualities, and I'm not using beautiful here in the sense of just a kind of adornment or an embellishment, but the qualities that really support the mind to become clear, the mind to become peaceful, for the conditions that enable liberating insight to arise. We cultivate and strengthen these qualities. And so it's actually a very empowering sort of teaching. And as Christina says, we have this propensity to focus often on the difficulties, on what's wrong with us. And we tend to sort of come later, or only as an afterthought, look towards these more beautiful qualities. So there's something here of a little rebalancing, that we really want to turn our attention to these particular qualities. So as we develop our mindfulness practice, we learn to establish awareness in the body. We learn to establish awareness of feeling tone and the mood or the climate of our mind. It's the first three foundations. And in the fourth foundation, we're invited to look at the way that mind states arise and are conditioned, and the way that they disappear and are deconditioned. So to become familiar with the processes of the arising and the waning of particular qualities, to learn how these beautiful factors, these awakening factors, grow and develop and are strengthened, to learn how they interact with one another, how they balance one another, and to learn how they decondition the hindrances. And for that, what we need to do is to really direct some more mindful awareness to the specific arising of these qualities in our experience, whether that's in our meditative experience, where often these qualities are particularly focused on, or they're arising in our daily life. And we're really hoping in this course, we've tried to give you tools both to explore this meditatively, but also within the context of your daily life, knowing that people will be picking up the course in different ways depending on your circumstances. You know, it's an offering for you to make your own and to use the tools that are offered in the context of your personal life, your personal classroom of awakening. So these factors also, you know, are developed, go towards awakening. They fulfill the practice of mindfulness. They bring the practice of mindfulness to its kind of fruition, or to the direction that it's supposed to go. And returning to the gardening metaphor, though, they're not things that we do and then we kind of got that done and dusted. Now I've got the results I want out of developing them. I was reflecting earlier that, you know, even an arahant or a Buddha or an awakened being continues to tend to the garden of their mind, you know, just as weeds take over when we don't look after our garden. This is a kind of lifelong skill of tending to the heart mind that we are hoping to inspire you to re-engage with, to pick up, and to you know, make something that really weaves into your personal life. Christina, do you want to add anything?
I'd like to again just reflect on this territory that Jaya has introduced, the the fourth way of establishing mindfulness in the Satipatthana Sutta. Many people puzzle over this section of the Satipatthana Sutta because initially it seems to be a collection of lists and it doesn't seem so practice oriented. My understanding that in the various translations, the Chinese, the Sanskrit, the Pali translations of the Satipatthana Sutta, it is these two lists that sit side by side. The list of the 7 treasures and the list of the 5 hindrances. And I've actually reflected on this quite a bit. And I think what the Buddha is describing is the kind of tension of waking up. For those of you who are not familiar with the 5 hindrances, you know, the obscuring factor of the tendency to be craving for sensual pleasure, the tendency towards ill will, the tendency towards restlessness and worry, the tendency towards dullness or dissociation, and the tendency towards doubt. When you look at that short list, I think all of us would recognize that these are not tendencies that arise only on a meditation cushion. These are the patterns that we encounter probably more times than we would wish in our lives. So the Buddha's putting these 2 lists side by side. He's saying, well, actually, the hindrances are our classroom. This is our classroom. We can regard this tension of waking up as being something quite negative, you know, where we have wonderful intentions and aspirations, and then too often we find ourselves relapsing into one of the hindrance factors. So then we find ourselves forgetful of our intentions and aspirations, and we find ourselves reacting with ill will or doubt or agitation. It's very easy to see this as a negative tension. In my understanding, the way that this is presented is this is the creative tension of waking up. Because that list of the 5 difficult patterns, this is our classroom, and this is where we cultivate the treasures. This is where we cultivate the limbs of awakening, not necessarily in the most ideal, perfect moments of our lives, but here, in the midst of aversion, what can be cultivated? In the midst of craving, what can be cultivated to calm that craving? In the midst of agitation and restlessness and worry, what really is our ally in those moments? In the midst of doubt, what do we call upon to really allow us to stand our ground, you know, to take our seat? So we're talking about this cultivation in this classroom. You know, in my experience, many people actually perhaps are not helped by having overgeneralized intentions. I mean, any intention to be awake is good, is wonderful. But, you know, when we wake up in the morning and say, well, I'm just going to be mindful today. That's a very big intention. And what I find helpful in the path is to have much more specificity around our intentions. You know, when I look at the list of the 7 treasures, I think about what would it be like to commit a month or longer, to commit a year, just to cultivating one of these treasures? What would it be like to really commit to cultivating serenity for a month or a year in the body, in the mind, in the midst of our lives, to remember that possibility, to remember that possibility? What would it be like for us to commit to cultivating joyfulness for a week, for a month, for a year, in the midst of the difficulties, the sorrows, to really begin to sense what we can appreciate, what gladdens the heart, what gladdens the mind, what brings a smile to the heart. To begin to question, you know, what do we understand about mindfulness? What does it really mean for us to be mindful? It's not an end in itself. It's not an achievement in itself, but it's the embarkation point for the whole of the path. I mean, without mindfulness, there is forgetfulness. Without mindfulness, there's disconnection. And what does mindfulness, how do we know when we're mindful? How do we know when we're not mindful? What would it be like for us to really cultivate equanimity? Not just on our cushion, but in the whole of our lives. I mean, this last year and a half or more has taught us so much of the need and the value of finding this cool place within ourselves where we can stand without being overwhelmed by anxiety or by fear or by reactivity. And to remember, equanimity is not a state that we achieve, some disembodied state. It is a way of being present within our lives, within all things. When we think about the quality of virya that we translate as courage or energy, I think so many people over the last year and a half or more have been asked to find resources of courage that they may have found, thought to be impossible for them. And sometimes isn't it just the willingness to show up? The willingness not to disconnect, not to dissociate, the willingness to turn towards life and kind of look it in the eye, and to be able to be equally near all things, to be truly present and responsive and to flourish. So I personally find it very useful in my own path, in my own practice, to be far more specific in my intentionality about what is being cultivated. And as Jaya says, we see what happens as we somewhat dedicate ourselves to these cultivations, that they deepen. They deepen, they become, the background of our thoughts and our words and our actions. And they offer us the possibility to really grow into being, and in the creative, the flourishing, the responsive, the wise people, the compassionate people that we have the potential to be. Anything you'd like to add to that, Jaya?
No, I'm wondering, thank you, Christina. I'm wondering whether it would be a good time to take a pause and do a little bit of practice just by way of digesting, and then allow people to ask some questions after that. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, we also wanted to have a short time of meditation together this evening, just to allow us to kind of receive what's been said, let that land in consciousness, and also to get a little flavor of turning towards some of the things that we've been speaking about. So if you need to stretch, if you've been sitting still for half an hour, you need to stretch and move a little bit, please do that, and then find a comfortable posture for about 15 minutes of meditation together. So establishing your posture, just beginning by sensing the body resting on earth, on your seat, your cushions, your stool, wherever you're sitting, whatever posture you're in. Letting mindfulness come to rest on the body, on the sensations that we call body. Landing in your space. Feeling that contact with the ground underneath you. And as you sense the body in awareness, making any micro adjustments that you want to, so that you can allow the body to soften and relax, cultivating an easeful, relaxed but alert presence, bringing your caring attention to the experience of the body just as it is right now. You might notice the hands resting in the lap or on the legs or wherever your hands are resting. Allowing the hands to soften. Being aware of their sensitivity. Allowing any tension in the shoulders or the neck to start to melt to the warmth of your caring attention. Becoming aware of the sounds in your space around you. Maybe also being aware of the movement of the breathing. Soft rocking movement of in-breath and out-breath. As we offer our wholehearted attention to this moment, to what's arising in our felt, sensed, conscious experience in this moment, recognizing the presence of the awakening factor of mindfulness, the first of the awakening factors. Maybe not perfect, maybe not perfected, but even moments of mindfulness. You might notice what's present in the mind itself, in the heart mind. Maybe there's interest, curiosity. Maybe there's a little boredom or grumbling, worry. Maybe there's peacefulness. To the extent that we can just calmly observe whatever's here, whether that's something pleasant or unpleasant, whether it's a sense of contentment or a sense of dissatisfaction. We can just calmly allow what's here to be here, take an interest in it, but also cultivating the mindfulness, the awakening factor of investigation. With our presence, with our interest, with our curiosity, starting to switch on the light, some of these beautiful qualities in the mind. For now, just keeping it really simple, just letting the attention come to rest with something that feels easeful, simple to be with, whether that's the breathing of the body, the contact with the ground, hands resting in the lap, or just the sounds and the silence around us. Savoring some moments of simplicity together. and noticing what's happening in this moment. Is mindfulness present? Has it returned if it had slipped away? As we come to the end of the meditation, just taking a moment to acknowledge what's happening now and to acknowledge the goodness of that short period of cultivating our capacity to be patiently, caringly present to our experience, with some interest, with some discernment. Good. Thank you, everybody. So we'll see whether you have, if you have questions, you're welcome to type them into the chat if you have any questions for me and Christina about the things that we've said or other aspects of what might be what you might want to know from us about the course.
I think some of these kind of practical questions of how long will the sessions be in the course, I think that Tricycle and the host today is going to answer those. Is mindfulness the same as noticing? We could probably speak for an hour to that question. No, it's not the same as noticing, I would say. I would say that noticing is part of mindfulness. I think one aspect of mindfulness is a simple knowing. It's a simple knowing. To know a thought is a thought, a sound is a sound, a sight is a sight, a way of being present when we're not so tempted to surround all of our sensory contact moments with narratives, with stories, with likes and dislikes, that simple knowing. It sounds perhaps rather basic, but it's a very crucial aspect of mindfulness, because it's what takes us out of the eye of the storm. It's what begins to establish a relationship of knowing, of befriending, of embracing the sights, sounds, thoughts, body sensations, feelings, moods that are part of our every moment. It's developing a kind of a literacy, I think, a mindful literacy of what is being experienced. There's another aspect of mindfulness which is equally, and these aspects of mindfulness are actually all equally important. There's another aspect of mindfulness which is really within the domain of investigation, investigative mindfulness, to probe beneath the surface of things, to probe beneath our concepts, our ideas, our idea that we know something, and to begin to ascertain its nature, its process. The image that's used is of a surgeon being faced with a wound in a patient. And rather than jumping to conclusions, the surgeon carefully palpates the wound so as to make it, to know the nature of the wound, to be able to make a diagnosis, to be able to offer a prognosis, to be able to prescribe a course of treatment. Another aspect of mindfulness is also protective awareness, learning to be a wise gatekeeper of our own hearts and minds. It involves discernment. It involves knowing what leads to distress and what leads to the end of distress. The wise gatekeeper stands at the gates of the city, welcoming in all of the visitors who seek to serve the city well. And the wise gatekeeper acknowledges the visitors to the city, knows them, acknowledges them, greets them. Those visitors that don't mean to serve the city well, and kindly actually doesn't invite them in. There's another aspect of mindfulness, which is to do with reframing perception. Reframing perception. And clearly one of the ways it's often spoken of in the discourses about this is through the cultivation of metta, of kindness. That which we have feared, that which we have rejected, that which we have condemned or judged, that we can actually learn to befriend, to include, to embrace. So reframing perception, these are all aspects of mindfulness. Actually, we as I've mentioned, this is such a huge topic, and we go into it much more in the course material. But I think one of the main benefits of knowing many of the nuances of mindfulness, because they're not all the same, is that mindfulness becomes very responsive. It's not something just passively watching. You know, there may be times in our lives when we feel very, very contracted and entangled, and we might be cultivating that element of mindfulness, which is very spacious. You know, there might be times in our lives where we feel very lost and very confused. It might be a time in our lives when we're cultivating or highlighting an aspect of mindfulness, which is much more to do with investigation and understanding. So being able to have available to us this kind of much broader understanding of what mindfulness is, as the Buddha spoke about it, actually is very empowering. It's very empowering. It really allows us to say, to open doorways of understanding. Okay, Jaya, do you want to take some?
Yes, maybe responding to the question about the emphasis on, so there's a question about you, it seems you're emphasizing constant weeding, whereas Dzogchen emphasizes accepting arisings as they are without separating the weeds from the good plants, or non-reacting. Dzogchen is a practice from the Tibetan tradition, which I've not trained in, but my understanding is that that's about it's maintaining the view of the awakened heart. It's a resting in natural awareness. And I'm kind of, this is a little bit beyond the scope of this course, but it actually speaks to an important question about this balance between doing and non-doing, because we've been talking about weeding out unskillful qualities from the mind and growing skillful ones, and yet at the same time we often talk about mindfulness in MBSR and as a practice of non-doing, of non-interference. But in order to arrive or to be able to rest in a non-reactive view, there's a certain amount of cultivation and work that needs to be done. So again, we come back to the gardener, and this question is if we're practicing in this way of discerning and evaluating qualities and which ones need to be watered and which ones need to be weeded out, are we going to be cultivating a state of hypervigilance? And I think the image of a good gardener is a really, really useful one, because a good gardener knows when to you just sit back and watch the process some of the time. You know, we're not constantly poking around in the terrain to try to make things happen. So we know when and this is another of the qualities of mindfulness, to know when an intervention is required and to know when actually we should just be receiving experience, you know. So yes, there's this ideal of equanimity, of non-reactivity, but it takes some cultivation to arrive there.
Okay, there's a question, is awakening the way to achieve mindfulness? I think that it's quite hard to tease apart these two words of awakening and mindfulness. I mean, obviously awakening is used in a number of different ways in the Buddhist teaching. It's certainly described as a process of waking up. And then, of course, the Buddha speaks about the unshakable awakening of the heart mind, you know, which we sometimes think of as being liberation. But let's think about this on a very practical level. If right now you bring your attention to the palm of your hand, be mindful of the palm of your hand. What happens with that? Something that was just sitting in the background, unnoticed, you know, unimportant, suddenly is visible to you. It's suddenly visible to you. You see your hand as this shape, this form, but within it, there's all these different processes and sensations. My sense is that one of the effects of mindfulness is to illuminate the moment. You know what it's like if you go out for a walk and you're lost in thought and, you know, you're preoccupied and you arrive at where you're going and you realize nothing has touched you. You know that you've hardly seen, you've hardly heard, you've hardly been touched by life. And you know that if you take that same walk, you know, with really the intention and the commitment to being present, to knowing where you are, to being wholehearted, it's a very, very different experience. The world comes to life. So mindfulness has this effect of illuminating the moment. I almost feel it's okay to say that mindfulness wakes up the world. It wakes up the world so that we can be touched. This, of course, is not just about the outer world. It's also about our inner world. When we begin to cultivate that dedication, the intention, the wholeheartedness, to listen inwardly, to listen to the life of our body, to listen to the life of our minds, hearts, they become visible to us. They become visible to us. They're illuminated in that awareness. They're illuminated in that light of mindfulness. And that illumination, or that waking up, of course, is what allows us to understand. It's what allows us to understand what is actually happening, rather than our story about what is happening, or rather than our neglect of this body, heart, mind process that we all live within. So I would say that this relative use of the word awakening is actually simply, it's almost another word for mindfulness. It's almost another word for mindfulness. Yeah, Jaya. Yeah, we only have a couple of minutes left.
Yes, I'm noticing the time. Is there time for one more question? Or? I just wanted the question about what advice do you have when doubt arises in relation to the practice and obscures it? And one of the really beneficial ways to respond to doubt is to spend time with wise companions. And you know, these sorts of opportunities are a way to do that. You know, that sometimes we kind of have to lean into other people's confidence a little bit to support our own practice. Most of us go through patches of dryness or being assailed by a doubt or a wobbliness or an uncertainty. You know, learning more, developing our understanding, but also receiving the encouragement of other people can be really, really helpful at that time. So that's just a brief answer to that one.
And just to close, I mean, I think it's very important that there was a question in the Q&A section. Can I repeat what the 7 treasures are? And I'm happy to do that, because this is really the heart of this program that's coming up. The first is mindfulness. The second is investigation. The third is energy or courage. The fourth is joyfulness. Then there's tranquility, serenity. Then there's collectedness, and then equanimity. So I'm very sorry we haven't had a chance to get to all the questions. This is a part of these programs that I actually enjoy the most. And so I really, really do look forward during the running of the program to be able to meet with you more. And I think in that format, I'll also be able to see you. At least I have in the past. So that's actually an added bonus. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much, Christina and Jaya. What a beautiful discussion and practice. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure everyone else here did as well. If you enjoyed this offering, please consider supporting us with a donation. There's a link in the chat box. It's tricycle.org/donate. We'll also have a link in the chat box to the coupon code to get $25 off the course if you would like to sign up. And we'll have both of those links in a follow-up email tomorrow as well. So thank you so much again, Jaya and Christina, and thank you everyone who joined us. Be well.
You're very welcome.